The day after tomorrow is my MOT, and I've just discovered something which I didn't realise. If I put on my pilot light, the pilot light is fine. If I click it over to the dip beam, I haven't got a dip beam. But I have got a main beam, and I have got the flash on the main beam. Because it's so dark and miserable in here, I've just popped the tank off, and now all I've got to do is follow the wire down into that mass of wires, find out where it connects, and just disconnect it, and then I can take it indoors. So the wire comes down, goes around, goes into that big plastic connector, so I need to pull that apart. Slide the plastic sheath off of the connector, and then you can see it's got two little plastic ears that you need to ping open, and also you need to do that other little brown one there. If your electrical problem is that the main beam, not the high beam, but the main beam doesn't work, but everything else works, what has happened is that in the left hand switch there has been a bit of a meltdown, and you can see the melted plastic there. There are 5 pins in here and 1 connector pin. If the connector pin has recessed because this is melted, then it won't work. To get at the melted part, you need to take out the cable grip, which is these 3 screws, and then you should be able to see down into there the part that you're going to have to repair. So having taken the cable grip out, you can see the 5 connections, and you can see the bright one. That's the one that recesses and moves, the yellow one. So if you look down into the switch, you can see the connections there, and you can see there's a little blade, and the blade can move or the connection can move, and the idea is just to heat it up and try and get them back in the right position. What I found with mine was that it had melted so much that it wasn't possible to do that, and although I rewired it and fixed the dip beam, after that the indicators wouldn't work. So in the end I just gave up and bought another switch, which cost me about 20 quid off of eBay. And the one I got didn't have that telltale burn mark in it. If your switch doesn't have that burn mark in it, it must mean that there's something wrong with the right hand light switch, and that's the one we can take apart easily just to check that it's working. So there's the unit off the bike, and the bit that I'm interested in is just in there. You can see it move, that part. I've got to get into there and find out why it's not connecting anymore. I'm looking in the back of it, that's the starter kill switch. Having already taken this apart and failing to cure my problem, I'm going to take it apart again. And what I've learned is the easiest way is to take all of the switches off first. Now that one comes off is easy, it's a circlip and it just pops off. That one, you undo that screw and it just pops off. This one, you undo the screw that is in there, but when you take this one off, inside it is a spring and a brass pin. Don't lose those. And then this one, you go downwards onto the back of it. That's the indicator switch with its screw. That's the indicator cancel with its screw and with its spring and with its pin, which you mustn't lose. That's the starter button with its circlip, and all this comes apart, so be careful you don't lose those parts. That's the cable clamp, and that's the inside of the switch with the actual light switch assembly. Now there's a loose spring in there, that part is loose, that little carriage that comes out, and underneath that is a spring. Now I have stuck them all in with coppery so they don't fall out, and they then have to connect into here, and you can see there's a ball bearing that I've stuck in with copperies, and there's the 3 connections, and I've cleaned those connections, and I cannot see anything wrong with this switch. There's no burnout, so I need to put this back together. But in order to put it back together, you have to take off the yellow switch. If I turn that over, you have to take that switch off in order to get that carriage back into that slot without it all falling everywhere. You'll have to be careful because that's got a spring in it. I put a glob of copperies on there, which means I can now turn it upside down without it falling out. And I put a glob of copperies on there where the ball bearing is, so that won't fall out. And this screwdriver that I've got is magnetic, so you can pick up the parts. Hopefully I should be able to turn it over and drop it into place on there, like that. So I've set it back up, I've put it in the correct place, and you can see the ball bearing is under the hole, because that little spring there, that has to go down onto that ball bearing and make it operate. So hopefully I now should be able to push the casing carefully back on and then reassemble. I've screwed the outer shell to the inner shell, and there's 1, 2, 3 screws for that, and then I've connected firstly that switch, then that switch, and then this one. Now that one and that one have got springs in, that one hasn't got a spring in it, but you have to do them up to the right tension. They're kind of self-loading, so I've done this so this is now nice and easy to move, and hopefully that will help with it. That one works correctly and that one works correctly. The indicator's a bit stiffer, it's got an inner mechanism that you don't need to take apart. And then the last part to put on is the starter button, and the little ring comes off, and there are 2 springs in there which you mustn't lose. I'm going to put dobs of copperies in there so they don't ping out, and then I'm going to really clean this up. So that's all nice and shiny. That only goes on one way. That's with a thick tab to the bottom, you know, like an arrow pointing all the way up. If you try and put it on the other way, you can see that it doesn't line up correctly. So a little bit of copperies on there before it goes back in. The starter button's popped back in, cable clamps back in. I haven't got any bits left, and it seems to me that all the switches are working. Not as snatchy as it was before. That's all good, that's all good, that's all good. Left and right. Alright, go and fit it on the bike, and hopefully that's cured my problem.